Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Wednesday, the 7th of May. I'm Stephen Ridgway. Well, quick update on the spat between NSO Group and WhatsApp. So as a recap, in case you're not been following this, WhatsApp sued NSO Group. NSO Group are the firm that make, well, it's really commercial, it's very expensive malware, spyware that they sell to people, which is meant to be focused on law enforcement and blah, 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 but actually seems to be being sold to all sorts of very disreputable people, including governments with appalling human rights records, and so on and so forth. WhatsApp sued them. And they sued them based on the fact that NSO Group were using a zero-day vulnerability that required no interaction from the users in order to compromise machines and put the spyware onto devices. Well, that's been rumbling through the courts in the US, I think. NSO Group has been ordered to pay $168 million to WhatsApp. A federal jury based in California has ordered the Israeli spyware maker NSO Group to pay approximately $168 million in damages to WhatsApp. Believe this is a first globally for these under these circumstances, and I think it's certainly a shot across the bows of organisations that think they can make a lot of money out of effectively writing malware and then selling it to dodgy law enforcement agencies. Interesting update. Let's see whether this changes law. Although I think off the back of it all, we're going to find is that law enforcement and security services will go and cry on the shoulders of national governments, who will then do things like say, well, we have to just remove all security from any communications of our citizens then. And a little bit like in the United Kingdom, where the government has enshrined the right to read all your emails and take all your photos. Right. On more, let's see, that was, I think, a good article. So another useful and quite interesting article I came across today. CISA, so the rather besieged US cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency has released a document talking about primary mitigations to reduce cyber threats to operational technology. They're not famous for catchy headlines, these guys, which is one of the reasons I love them, because the stuff they come out with just does what it says it's going to do. It's easy to understand and follow. It is not sensationalist. It is talking about the fact that unsophisticated cyber attacks are primarily what targets operational technology. In fact, unsophisticated cyber attacks constitute, I think the last stats I saw was something in it's certainly north of 90% of all attacks are unsophisticated attacks. They are using vulnerabilities that are years, if not decades old, using techniques which are readily identifiable. You would think that this stuff wouldn't be successful, but amazingly, these very simple attacks often are successful. In fact, one of the things that we've talked about a lot over the last couple of years is the fact that 80% of cyber defense is just get your basics right. The other 20% is APT, brain fryingly complex stuff that you're unlikely to be able to 100% protect yourself against, although you can do things to move in the right direction. But I've seen, and we at TSC have seen, organizations get diverted into looking at that fearfully complicated 20% at the expense of good basic cyber hygiene that would cover off the 80% and have been compromised via some very simple, very straightforward little bit of phishing and then some exploits of some very straightforward vulnerabilities and a handful of living off the land. So very much in agreement that with CISA, CISA's in agreement with me, that keeping a firm eye on the basics is really the most important thing you can do. And we'll say again, it comes down, it starts with your ability to detect stuff. So unless you are exceedingly confident that your security technical controls will never fail, the most important part of security is in the detection, because if you can't see it, you can't do anything about it. I think the reality is that, yes, you need strong technical controls. You need to prevent most bad things from happening before they do happen. But you can't guarantee that defenses today will still work tomorrow. And because of that, you need visibility over what's actually happening. And we talked about the three domains of information as well, which are absolutely vital. And just to reiterate those, so you need to know what's actually happening on your endpoints. Endpoints being anything from end user computing through to server computing, through to as far as you can, as much as you can get out of cloud computing. Certainly, if you're running EC2 type computing, rather than doing everything through Lambda services, you need to understand in detail what's actually happening on those devices. You need to understand what's traversing your networks, bearing in mind that even when you think you don't have a network, you do. It's just somebody else's network. So the fact that it's cloud and you connect to it over the internet doesn't mean there isn't a network. So understanding what's your network is of vital importance. And then the final thing is security related logs. So you can get logs from all sorts of things: application logs, system logs, authentication logs, anything that can log stuff. So you need those three domains of information visible to you within your some kind of tooling, so that you can then begin to correlate and write detection rules and do triage based on those three things. And if you've got that visibility right, you're a long way towards it. Anyway, the article from CISA makes very interesting reading. It is aimed at operational technology, because if we think we've not managed to get just general technology to a point where we are doing the right stuff in cyber, despite having been working on this for 25 years, operational technology lags a long way behind. So it makes good reading. Okay, and then two articles just to finish up with. One, which I'm astonished at, having worked in financial services in the past. However, it illustrates a very underrated threat that I think we need to begin to spend a little bit more time thinking about, especially in the world of everything is in somebody else's data center. So an IT worker from Computer Center has been accused of allowing his girlfriend into Deutsche Bank's restricted data center areas. Now, where does one even begin? I'm surprised that that was possible. Um, Having worked in financial services and critical financial infrastructure in the past, um, certainly when I was there, the restrictions. I wasn't at Deutsche, I was somewhere else, but the restrictions to get into the data center. So it was tiered, right? So you could only set foot in the data center if you were already approved. You then could only access, so all of our server compute was in a caged area. And by the way, all of the COBs and power in and out of that area was dedicated and armored. So pretty difficult to actually get access to it. So floor to ceiling cages, not cages that stop at the raised flooring that you can crawl underneath. So really physically difficult to get in, and everything was logged and everything was on camera. Now, could we have been compromised by somebody in the data center that sells a data center, the safe hands kind of people? Well, possibly, but we ran the cameras that monitored our cage, so we could see when people were in there, and there were triggers set so that if somebody went into cage, that could then be recorded and correlated with the change request has allowed somebody into the cage, because clearly you can't just go into the cage and start doing things in zero downtime environments. So I'm surprised that it was actually possible for a computer center employee to bring his girlfriend in to look at it. And apart from this, why would she want to? I mean, really, these places are extremely noisy, very cold, quite there's a cold wind that blows around a data center most of the time. I'm certainly used to. I don't know. Maybe in these days of energy efficiency, maybe that's all changed. I don't know, but it's certainly not a pleasant place to be. And there are cameras everywhere. So, however, the other side of that is, and especially thinking about the fact that we use a lot of cloud services. Us as in general, not TSC specifically, but everybody, our customers, the industry. There's an awful lot of cloud computing going on. That stuff isn't something nebulous, haha. It is literally just a bunch of computers in somebody else's data center. Now, whereas historically, if it was your own compute in your your own rented data center, you had physical control over where your processes actually run. If it's in the cloud, they're being elastically moved around from one place to another. So you might be able to determine what region of the world your stuff sits in, but you certainly can't determine which particular servers or who's got access to them. One of the arguments a few years ago was that, well, cloud is more secure than on-prem because it's cloud. Well, I disagree. I think cloud is absolutely no more secure, to the point where I actually think that cloud is probably less secure than on-prem. It is probably technically harder to no, it isn't. All you're doing is you're just sticking your head in the sand. I was going to say it's technically harder to secure your own on-prem stuff. It isn't actually, because the security you have to implement isn't difficult to do, but it's done if you run the data center, the stuff in the data center yourself. If you're relying on a cloud service, you actually don't know what security they're applying. You don't know who has access to things. So no, I would argue that cloud is inherently less secure than on-prem, and this is a good example of why. And then finally, from me today, there's an article in Cybersecurity News that points out the risks of charging mobile devices at public charging stations. Rather than go into all of the pros and cons of these sorts of things, the exploit that they're talking about is that if you plug in anything to your mobile device, generally these days something pops up that says, do you trust this thing? And you can say no. That works to restrict data transfer to and from the mobile device. It doesn't necessarily prevent other non-data, non-storage type USB devices from functioning with your mobile device. So if, for example, you plugged in a keyboard, a USB keyboard into a mobile device, it may well be recognized as a USB keyboard and become available without prompting anything on the screen. Little bit dependent on the OS, how the OS behaves under those circumstances. However, this has been well known that you can make malicious USB devices spoof things like keyboards. Once you've spoofed a keyboard, it can do whatever it is that you want it to do. So, for example, in this particular exploit, users have been tricked into charging their devices at compromised charging points. You plug it in, so yes, your phone charges. In the background, the malicious device spoofs a keyboard, which can be used to send commands and basically interact with the phone, whether the phone's locked, unlocked, or whatever it may be. So the fix to this is OS level. I think Google and Apple require your PIN before USB devices become accessible to the operating system. So that does require you to do something, which is some form. There is, there's a modicum of control there, not a huge amount of control, but at least some control there. A lot of other mobile device manufacturers do nothing under those circumstances and just rely on the fact that, especially as Android's based on Linux, Linux will recognize USB devices and just make them work. Something else that is worth being aware of is that you can tell the OS that a USB device has had a role swap. So once something like a USB keyboard is connected, you can then make it do things that are not necessarily directly keyboard like. So you could say your USB keyboard has just become a Bluetooth keyboard. So if you are in the vicinity of the device gets plugged in, it sees a USB keyboard that works. The malicious device sends a role swap saying, oh, actually the keyboard has now moved to this Bluetooth keyboard, and the USB malicious pseudo keyboard then kind of clicks OK on that. Then you've given control of your device to an attacker. I haven't tried any of this stuff yet. Might do. I might see if I can spin something up. Might not. Might get some of the guys at work to spin something up and have a little play with these sorts of things. However, it does show that you need to think very carefully about what you plug into what, because whilst you think that something will play by the rules, it doesn't necessarily have to. Okay, that's all from me for today. Hope you have a good Wednesday. Speak to you all again tomorrow morning.